Laughter doesn't disappear overnight. It fades when survival becomes a full-time job. In one forgotten corner of history, there was a village that endured famine, violence and displacement so completely that when peace finally arrived, something vital never returned. They lived. They rebuilt. But, joy never came back. This isn't a story about death. It's about what survival can quietly take from the living. Before hardship swallowed the land, the village followed patterns as old as memory. Work ended with conversation. Evenings carried sound, children ran, elders argued, life had rhythm. Then scarcity arrived, not like a storm, but like a tightening fist. Food became uncertain first. Harvest shrank, stores ran thin, meals were stretched, then skipped. People learned to chew slowly, to swallow less, to ignore the ache that settled behind the ribs. Hunger didn't scream. It waited. Soon after came fear. Armed men moved through the region. No one knew whose side was safe. Villages learned quickly that attention was dangerous. Fires were put out early. Voices dropped. Movement became careful. Survival meant being unremarkable. That was the moment laughter became risky. Silence wasn't grief, it was strategy. Sound carried, smoke carried, emotion carried. Those who survived learned to flatten themselves against the world. Crying children were pressed into chests. Arguments were swallowed. Even joy was restrained, because joy made people careless. This wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Villages that stayed quiet lasted longer. Villages that celebrated were noticed. So people adapted. The human body is, excellent at that. Heart rate slow. Faces harden. Muscles stay tense, even at rest. Psychologists now call this prolonged survival stress. At the time, it was just life. The most striking change came with the children. They grew up without noise, without games that required shouting, without stories told loudly around firelight. They watched adults constantly scanning the horizon, flinching at sudden sounds. Curiosity was replaced by caution. Play, it teaches risk in safe ways. But these children, they didn't get that. Instead, they learned restraint, how to sit still, how to observe, and how not to ask questions that might draw attention. Years later, visitors described the village children as, unusually calm, polite, detached. They didn't run to greet strangers. They just watched from doorways. Survival had shaped them before joy ever really had a chance. History moved on, as it always does. The fighting ended, trade routes reopened, crops recovered, aid arrived late, but it arrived. On paper, the village survived. People didn't really know how to celebrate it. Laughter, honestly, felt too loud. Music, well, it felt intrusive. Even weddings were subdued. Smiles came slowly, if they came at all. Elders, they noticed something strange. When children laughed, it actually startled adults. Not because it was unwelcome, but because it just felt foreign, like a sound from another lifetime. The body remembers what the calendar forgets. No one in the village called it trauma. There was no word for it. There was only the sense that, well, something had shifted and never reset. Survivors slept lightly. Sudden noises triggered alertness. Even years later, people stored food excessively, even during good seasons. They avoided large gatherings. They distrusted abundance. This wasn't weakness. It was learned intelligence. The brain had been trained by years of danger, and it refused to stand down. Modern researchers have seen this pattern in famine survivors, war survivors, and displaced communities worldwide. Survival rewires reward systems. The brain prioritizes safety over pleasure. Joy becomes unnecessary, sometimes even suspicious. Outsiders often admire resilience. But, resilience has a cost. To endure, the village had narrowed itself. Emotion was trimmed down to essentials. Fear stayed useful. Love became quiet. Joy, loud and unpredictable, was set aside. No one chose this consciously. It happened because it worked. And once the danger passed, there was no clear way back. You can rebuild houses, you can replant fields, but you can't order the nervous system to forget. That's the part history books rarely mention. This story isn't unique. It echoes across centuries and continents. Communities that survive extreme hardship often emerge changed in ways that aren't immediately visible. The absence of laughter is easy to miss. There are no ruins to mark it, no dates to record it. But, it shapes generations. Survival isn't the finish line. It's the beginning of something else. Sometimes, honestly, it's something quieter. Sometimes, it's something heavier. And sometimes, it's something that takes decades to really understand. In a world that praises toughness and endurance, stories like this, they remind us to ask harder questions. Not just who survived, but how they lived afterward. Not just what was lost, but what never returned. History isn't only about battles and borders. It's about nervous systems, habits, silences passed down like heirlooms. And once you learn to see that, honestly, you start hearing history differently. If this story stayed with you, that's not an accident. These are the kinds of truths history whispers instead of shouts. If you want more unfiltered survival stories, the kind that go beyond dates and dig into the human cost, subscribe to the channel. Share this episode with someone who thinks survival is the same as winning. Because sometimes The hardest part of history isn't staying alive. It's learning how to live again.